Welcome everyone. This is our final UCSD Visiting Artist Lecture Series of 2020. And I'm Amy Adler, I'm Chair of the Visual Arts Department. Before we begin, I feel compelled to take the moment to reach out on behalf of the entire department to our students and our extended community, whether you're here now or viewing this later, who are especially distraught after the recent and senseless deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. I wanted to especially recognize the pain that is being so deeply felt by our Black students and our students of color. Your lives, your health, and your security matter so much to us, and we stand with you and all of those who are protesting in San Diego and wherever in the world you may be to say that Black lives matter. We know that many of you are angry and anxious and hurt and sad by the current events, and we really understand that under these circumstances, it's hard to focus. Especially in week 10. I'm just gonna turn off my text messages, sorry. And it's really unimaginable to finish even this week, finals, and to care about graduating. And we understand, and we hear you when you say that school seems almost irrelevant right now. I just want you to know that I understand, and I'm also finding it difficult to focus right now, and even to be here introducing this lecture series tonight. That being said, I also believe that we have an even more urgent role to play as artists and educators at this time. And so we absolutely have to keep moving so that our work can hopefully make a positive impact on the world around us. So I want to wish you all the best in finishing this quarter, everybody. And I hope you'll reach out to me directly if there's any way that the department or the university can support you. So since this is our final lecture of the year, I just want to acknowledge the work of Paolo, Nick, Laurence, and Bailey for organizing these talks. I'd especially like to acknowledge Jackie, who makes all things possible and to whom we owe our deepest gratitude. So now I'm very, very pleased to introduce Keith Mayerson. I met Keith when we were both graduate students in the early 90s. He was at UC Irvine and I was at UCLA. It was a pretty small community back then, and we immediately, I think, bonded as kindred spirits and total weirdos making figurative art when it wasn't any cooler than I think it is today. And I've been super deeply impressed by his extensive body of work and his career accomplishments, a few of which I'll quickly list here. Keith's been showing his work in galleries and museums internationally since 1993. He has over 50 solo shows on his resume, and his work is the subject of several large, impressive monographs. His works included in permanent collections of the Whitney, the Museum of Modern Art, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, to name a small few. His ongoing and retrospective project, My American Dream, was recently the subject of a solo exhibition at the Cleveland Museum of Contemporary Art, as well as featured in the Whitney Biennial in 2014. In 1996, just after grad school, Mayerson produced a graphic novel called Horror Hospital Unplugged, which was a collaboration with the writer Dennis Cooper. And in 2011, there was a second edition released. And this is definitely on my personal top 10 of all time. Mayerson's extraordinary handling of paint, his decades-long commitment to queer iconography, his reflections on contemporary culture make him stand out as a truly important voice of our generation. And I'm so pleased to be able to hear him talk about his work today. I just want to say one more fun fact, which is that Mayerson served on the board of the trustees at the Museum of Comics and Cartoon Art. Not many people can say that. He currently teaches in the USC Roski School of Art, where he is chair of painting, drawing, and printmaking. So I hope you'll add any questions you have for Keith in the chat, and that you'll all stay for a Q&A at 7 following the talk. So thank you for coming, and please join me in welcoming Keith Mayerson.
Hey, Amy, thanks so much. I'm really honored and truly humbled to be here, especially tonight on such a crazy night. In a crazy week, and frankly, it does seem like art feels like it should take a backseat to everything that's happening right now. So I'm glad if you're watching now or in the future, if you're hunkered down in your own bunker, or if you're protesting on the street or watching the news, I don't blame you. But I'm honored to be here. I do have 400 and something slides, so I feel I should get right down to it. And hopefully some of this. Oh, and the host disabled attendee screen sharing, so I need to be able to screen share, Paulo. But hopefully, what I have to say, especially the latter half of my work, may feel a little pertinent. I hope so. Anyway, here we go. So, as Amy mentioned, I went to UC Irvine back in the early 90s. I was a student at Brown University, and I studied fine art and semiotics as an undergrad. And really, my goal was to be a cartoonist. But the politics of that time, and also wanting to create images that sort of lasted longer than a quick guffaw, was something that kept me going. I was really interested in bringing up ideas aesthetically, and comics always were to that point. I explored many different kinds of ideas and so on, but for my thesis show at UC Irvine, I combined a sort of a bad Cole Porter-like screenplay of Pinocchio, The Big Fag, something that I'd written. I did a lot of playwriting while I was at Brown, wrote and direct plays, and decided instead of doing a comic version of Pinocchio, The Big Fag, that I would illustrate specific images from poignant parts of the play that I then displayed in a horizontal fashion, but then later salon style. Part of my conceit was I employed different actors for different characters. And so this is John Wayne as Geppetto. And I also had the idea that I would use William Blake-like songs as interludes, where I would be illustrating the text. But with comics, it's really interesting because the words say one thing and then the images say another. I always feel it's almost like blues music, where a blues musician might say or sing, oh, my baby left me and I feel so bad, twing, twing, twum. And the lyrics tell you what to think about while you feel the music synesthetically, and it sends you into a different kind of rapture. And to combine the two of those elements, the semiotics of comics, along with juxtaposing one image next to another. Scott McCloud calls this in this great book, Understanding Comics, Ideas of Closure, where it's up to the viewers to ultimately decide the content. And if the machinations of your brain are running while you're thinking about what it might mean to you, then hopefully it will impact you further. So Pinocchio, everybody knows the story, but he has to learn the language in almost a Lacanian way in order to become part of the patriarchal order. In my version, he's a confused, mixed up, repressed gay homosexual, and he has to learn the language of who he is for his own way, and also from help from others. This is Jodie Foster as the Blue Angel fairy. At that time, she went to Yale. She's reading here Judith Butler's Gender Trouble, who rescues him here. This is sort of a New Yorker cartoon version where she says, shut up and drink. Obviously, this is a parable that follows a lot of my own story. This ages me a little bit. This is Clinton, and this was the early 90s. The senator began screaming off with his nose, and Jesse Helms. But the idea here was as if my version of Pinocchio exists along with the original, and some gay collector was able to collect different plates as if, different children's stories existed along with the original text. This is Montgomery Cliff, who was like a repressed but sort of out gay person, but died of alcoholism, which is bad. This is Jodie Foster as a blue fairy, sort of rejecting Pinocchio after he's sort of come into his own intellectually, but not emotionally. But then he finds Lampwick, here played by Keanu Reeves. Here it says Lampwick was the laziest boy in the world. they have their fun. And then Lampwick takes Pinocchio to the sea of, to the field, the land of boys. And you have to remember, this is a time where AIDS was still really prevalent and people were really dying. I was part of the ACT UP generation. This is hegemony cricket, who's being conquered by Pinocchio. Beware patriarchy, Pinocchio, the big fag is here. With ACT UP, it was, you know, I'm here, I'm queer, I'm fabulous. And in my version of Pinocchio, he's able to sort of stand his ground, find his love with Lampwick, and realize his gay self in order to become his own, a real boy. And this was the end, you know, based on the sick rose the little boy found. These lyrics are actually funny if you read them. I did publish a screenplay. It was at the Drawing Center last summer, actually, the 25th anniversary of it. I'm glad we've gone really far, but there's still a long ways to go. And, you know, at UC Irvine in the early 90s, a lot of my faculty were actually in the famous 1993 biennial. But Larry Pittman was saying, who was in the biennial, and this was the thesis shows that appeared at UC Irvine, that he didn't want art that told you what to think, but rather invited you to think for yourself. And I always thought that that was really pertinent. Your thesis show is really important. UCSDers, it's really, it's good to let people know what it is that you're doing. I was really happy that this show traveled to Kiki Gallery in San Francisco at the time. And then Annie Philbin saw it there and brought it to the Drawing Center in New York. It was really my debut and was an art forum and so on. Back in the early 90s when there was a recession, and as Amy said, there was a really neat small community of artists and galleries that were showing art that really mattered, hopefully for a reason, because it was really content rich. I'm the kind of artist that if people get it too much, I feel like maybe I'm doing something wrong. I always want to complicate it for viewers. My next show was at Richard Tejas Gallery back in '94, and this was called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And for this show, I had 7 different narratives that I mixed up and put together. So the closure that the viewer had to achieve was really challenge, but hopefully if you go look at for a long time and think about for a long time, it's meaningful as art. And if you could seduce your viewer into looking at something for a long time and thinking about it too, hopefully you're getting somewhere. One of the narratives was River Phoenix being abducted by blue meanies and saved by a teddy boy, sort of John Lennon. River Phoenix had just died and he was sort of a star-yard utopia thinker. Lennon. Neither one of them were gay, but they both had sort of gay inklings and supposedly relationships. Another narrative was Keanu, who wasn't that famous at that moment, and a lot of people had cited him, and I would collect Keanu sightings and then do images as if I was sort of an older gay watercolor artist doing New Yorker type illustrations where I would relate the story here of Keanu sighting where somebody spotted him at the Chateau Marmont and he invited his friend to stay over on the couch anytime, wondering about his sexuality. This was Arthur Rimbaud, the poet, posed as the character Maldoror by the Comte de Lautremont, which was a Victorian actually a symbolist vampire story that was written right around the time of Arthur Rimbaud's writing, but done in the style of Odie and Ray Dawn and signed by Verlaine. So it was as if Verlaine, his older lover, was doing these images. And then a friend of mine had collected a lot of photomat pictures of a guy who worked at a photomat who would double the photos of people who had interesting pets. And this man sadly died of AIDS-related causes. And I felt like these were interesting avatars. You know, part of the power of comics is if you have this centralized, reduced character, like a happy face, anybody could be that character. The power of Snoopy is that he's an anthropomorphized dog, so anybody could be Snoopy. And I was thinking of these people as sort of gay people who might have died of AIDS, or also sort of dealing with that early 90s, still coming out, repressed attitude of Morrissey and friends, like the Smiths, things that I was really interested in at the time. This was a narrative of Archie Andrews from the famous comics, who's in love with Reggie, and they have a homosexual relationship, but then Reggie's are bisexual, and this is Archie, and then they're abducted by aliens. And then Archie finds out that everybody's an alien and he's a human, but it was done in the style of, I always felt that Archie was like Hergé, who did Tintin, and Hergé, who did Tintin, was influenced by Hergé, the Japanese woodblock artist, with a little Henry Darger thrown in, trying to get a lot of narrative conceits done on these watercolors on rice paper. These were photos of this old man that I found from a gay pawn shop in New York, where he spliced together the image. So he was sort of having sex with himself in a sort of a Pierre Monier kind of way. And then these were images based on a script from a turgid sort of porn film where the actor was this nice young guy who was being interviewed by some troll, and then they have unsafe sex afterwards. And his favorite star was Kirk Cameron, who was a born-again Christian. And so the idea here is that people sort of navigate through these narratives here. River's getting abducted by the Blue Meanies, and bad things are happening. Next to cats, they're feeling sad. Next to Keanu sightings here at the Agnes B store in Beverly Hills, next to more pets. I was also making a lot of art jokes. This is Larry Poon's art joke with complementary colors and the sea of holes. This is actually a self-portrait of me based on the quote from the film where he really hated sports. I did too when I was a kid playing soccer. John Lennon finds River Phoenix and saves him from the Blue Meanies. And obviously this is like an AIDS parable. Here, Archie walks in on Reggie having sex with another woman and runs away. And then goes into therapy. But the good news with the Yellow Submarine narrative is that they do find love and their own space and place with one another, like I had done with my boyfriend, now husband, Andrew Madrid. And really, I was starting to navigate who I was as a person coming out in the early 90s, knowing who I was personally as a human being, but intellectually kind of coming through and trying to find a narrative that fit that. But as a painter, it was interesting, the postmodern times of the early 90s, you almost had to have an excuse to paint. And with the pet paintings, I found that was a hopefully good idea, that I could just sort of lusciously sink my teeth into painting and really think about my thoughts while I was painting. I love to be like a method actor and listen to music that's meaningful to me, or watch movies while I'm painting in the background that helps me, suture into the character, almost like an RPG game. Here, this angry red poodle actually ended up at LACMA. And I was able to do these bigger pet paintings and have fun painting. This is of Gertrude, our first Yorkie that Andrew and I had. This is Wojciech. Never name your pet after a tragic character. Sadly, Wojciech died. And other animals. And in doing these, I really felt that sort of liberation of being able to paint and express myself through painterly painting, which in the early 90s, you weren't really allowed to do, but it was really freeing. My boyfriend, now husband, Andrew, got into graduate school in New York City. So I moved back to New York. And during the drive back, I was listening to the Beach Boys. I love the Beach Boys and Pet Sounds. And the neat thing about Brian Wilson, when he was singing like songs like Caroline No, where he would say, "My baby died," like that, he was able to synchronize the word, actually cry, with the emotion that he was feeling, to sort of bond that semiotic together, where the form was actually acting as a feeling. And I wanted to strip away all the artifice of those sort of postmodern styles that I was appropriating for its good baggage, and really get to the core of what it was I wanted to say. And when I came to New York, I started just doing these paintings, really raw, just coming from automatic drawing, to do automatic painting, trying to get to the core of what it was I was feeling that was operating, the batteries that were operating the engines of those earlier works. I did a show at Diaz called Monty's Dream, The Sleeper in the Valley, based on a dream that maybe Montgomery Clift might have, based on the title of my favorite Rimbaud poem, where everything seems alive, but there's a soldier in the middle of a field who's dead. And I wanted to sort of introduce this very sort of primal kind of painting with my narrative structure. These were all unified 5x7 feet paintings that were almost like a movie screen. And I felt like I wanted to sort of take people through different chapters of maybe a person's life, or the beginning and the end of a world. This is sort of a birth sequence. And this came from automatic drawing, where I automatically draw sort of R2D2 and a Simon-like apparatus, but it also almost seems like a figure. And then this was sort of early adolescence with a FU flag. Hey gang, it's happy face, the have a nice day dude who's not having a happy day at all. He says everything sucks, go to effing hell, and so on. And just being able to paint a little bit more loosely, invent different narratives that didn't necessarily have to have a finite beginning and an end. This was sort of later adolescence, or sort of the world evolving. This is the sheep of the world being marauded by skeletons. This was the aliens and flying saucers taking care of the rest of the sheep that were left until we were at the end of the world here. Maybe that this is a space arc of people with a Death Star-like moon wantonly looking at the arc as it glides by. And again, like these were sort of simple ideas that I really want to bring about with a motive agency coming from my unconscious as well as my conscious. I always feel that the neat thing of an artist is that you're consciously controlling your brush and your subconscious leaks out. And if it has a life of its own, it's something. I was really interested in these circle images that we're doing, talking about batteries, because I really wanted them to vibrate. This was a time that, you know, again, in a postmodern age where painting was negated to have a life of its own or be a window onto another world. But those were the very things that I liked beyond the narrative of painting itself, when it would be able to move you with feeling. And I was trying to get these sort of bands of energy where the paintings would kind of go push and pull or go whoopee, whoopee, woo, and take you into a different place. I continued also to break down into sort of these raw iconographic kind of figures that could stand in for anything. Again, coming from automatic painting, this is sort of like a razor kind of character that feels like sort of a sad pet to me. And I was mixing it with figurative imagery. This is from Jesus Christ Superstar. I'm a religious mutt. My mom's Southern Baptist, my dad's Jewish. And so I wasn't raised in a church or a synagogue, but I feel like I'm a very spiritual person and find my sort of religiosity sometimes in cultural artifacts. And so here I was listening to Jesus Christ Superstar over again and again and again, try and get to the core of what that might mean. And I was painting in the basement on Christopher Street in New York, and the painting fell on my palette when electricians came in, and I was like, Eureka, it's done, because it's like he's getting stoned to death. And then this was next to this painting. This was my debut show in New York at Jay Gorney. At the time, it was a big gallery on Green Street in Soho, and Larry Pittman showed there, and also Kathy Opie, who, believe it or not, worked the cage at that time, the photo cage at UC Irvine, who I was friends with, and I loved the idea of showing there. But this was a show that freaked people out. Uptown, there were Soutine shows and Nicholas de Stael shows, but downtown it was about art and fashion. If there was painting, it was either John Curran or painting that was really nailed down and looked like photos. And so people didn't really know how to take this show. It was something that was very different in this time. Here, I really wanted the idea that the mechanics of trying to suture into an avatar of an iconic face, and that you're searching for the face and you'd be vibrating in and out. And this would be next to an image like this, where this was sort of like this orb that you would hopefully grab into and take out another psychological subconscious space. Next to Laurence Olivier's Henry V. The previous Laurence Olivier image was of Hamlet. This again was from Jesus Christ Superstar. This is Palm Sunday. And again, I was doing a lot of automatic rendering, and I didn't realize that there was sort of a bird that was in the middle that looked like a goldfinch, or you know, a sheep-like head on the corner that was sort of next to this. Again, this sort of this vibrating feeling that was next to this Frankenstein painting. I wanted to do a non-cheesy image of Frankenstein, thinking about him as an abject avatar in a symbolist era, where a lot of those romantic feelings were being harnessed into iconographic image. And I love Mary Shelley and I love James Whale, and trying to get into what the feelings were to be a Frankenstein. Next to Keanu from Point Break, and these were juxtaposed one another, so it's almost as if he was shooting at the Frankenstein. Next to this one, this was a burning landscape. And here I really felt like I got somewhere where in my unconscious, I was creating these different figures that were happening. And I wanted to try to bring them out without illustrating them, to create a more Renaissance-like space than Gorky, but not illustrate it like Dali, and just sort of leave it there hovering. This was of a porn star named Johann Pollock, and this was from Henry V with Castles in the Sky and Ships at Sea. This was sort of the end of this show, next to this image of Monty Cliff as Red, from the movie Red River, as a fallen soldier, where a horse is sort of appearing out of his beard. Downstairs, I'd become known for drawings a little bit, but I relegated the drawings downstairs. This is a Montgomery Cliff. It says this is a drawing about dying. Unconsciously, it almost looks like a Grim Reaper. And these were from Mike Myers from Halloween, where it's this boy who also is sort of this abject other. Obviously, I don't like the horror of Halloween, but I do relate to that abject character growing up in a cul-de-sac suburbia of Denver as I did. Klaus Curtis put me in a show at Mary Boone, and I decided to put in my abstract painting. I call these things iconscapes. I'm a son of a psychoanalyst, sort of a penchant for the unconscious. I really want to try to see if I could bring out that dreamlike world. These were based on the four horses of the apocalypse. And I was listening to negative music like Joy Division for this one, but I also wanted to do sort of joyous music, sort of listening to a lot of spiritual and religious music for the next one. Again, sort of dark music. And then sort of a mixture here. People really didn't get this work. This was back in 1997, 98. People know what Kandinsky is and so on, but there weren't that many contemporary people doing this kind of stuff. And, you know, it was bewildering to me. I was glad that the work was getting acknowledged. And I really do feel if you have a really good show, hopefully you're creating binaries, and some people get it and some people don't. But it was a little frustrating. Also, my husband and I moved to a place on 46th Street that was terrible. And there was a brothel underneath us, and our puppy died, and Andrew fell into a big depression. I had sort of my Holden Caulfield Rambo moment of the mendacity of the art world. You know, who cares about rich white people? This wasn't the audience that I wanted to reach. And I pulled all my work out of the galleries. I decided to retire early, and we would go to our Lake Elsinore cabin, Andrew's family's grandfather's cabin, out in the middle of nowhere in Paris with the E. Many of you guys might know it. This was really stupid, but it was interesting. I did a lot of plein air painting. This was of my cat Wojciech. I did also abstract painting, kind of projecting onto the landscape. I was teaching at UC Irvine. We were raising chickens and geese and German shepherds who are all in this picture. If you hear the macaw, that's my parrot in the background, Matisse. I came back to New York, though, with my tail between my legs. I decided if I was wired to do this, I should really do it. And if the people at Walmart really knew what we were about, they'd probably club us. And, Paris was really nice and interesting in some ways, but the guys with the ZZ Top beards were a little threatening. And it took me a long time. Let this be a lesson to you. Never pull yourself off the art world. Always be grateful for what it is that you get. To put myself back on the map, it took a while. I lived in Soho in a small apartment with Andrew. This is a picture of Rimbaud next to an iconscape. And I just started building a narrative. This one was based on a screenplay I wrote called Hamlet 1999. And this was actually in 2000. This is based on Michelangelo's Pieta. And this is River Phoenix as a Horatio, kind of like Pinocchio. I was employing different actors and different scenes to be in a very loose version of my sci-fi homoerotic version of Hamlet. This is from the Miyazaki movie, Princess Mononoke, who was sort of like a Hamlet. And then luckily, Derek Eller allowed me to have a show, and I basically transported the salon of my apartment and put it, densely packed into a gallery. This is very dangerous. You're, in the art world, you're not supposed to create more supply than there is demand. But I decided, life is too short, and I wanted to just go for it and just do a huge cosmology. I've always been interested in the idea of the Kantian sublime, and some part of that sublime is the dynamic sublime, kind of like the Sistine Chapel, when there's so much of something that makes you feel a small part of a much bigger world. And if you could feel that small part of the much bigger world, you start thinking about your own agency and how you relate to other people and other things, and how we need, hopefully, then to care for other people and our environment. This was also, I have to note, during the W era. You could see a picture of George Bush in the corner there. And that was really the first image. Bush seems like nothing now, but at the time he seemed kind of evil and stupid. And this was my reaction to that. I wanted to go back to painting from film stills and so on, but in a more loose manner. This is actually James Dean. This was my version of Bush at the time from Westworld, Yul Brynner, where he's a robot underneath things. Actually, when John Kerry was going up against George Bush, I did this painting of Superman that looks a little bit like John Kerry trying to supersede. This is Rambeau as Hamlet. This is a very frustrated Spider-Man who can't save all. And this is another robot buddy gorilla where, I was relating to the idea of human beings being very primal, almost like primates, and then having a corporate patriarchal ideology organizing our thoughts and our minds as to what it is that we want to do. This was also during 9/11. Andrew and I lived in Soho at the time of 9/11 when it happened. And we heard the plane fly overhead. I went out to the street on my way to teach at NYU and saw the hole with the people in the building. I saw my kids at NYU and I said, you guys, art's not necessarily therapy, but I don't know what else to do but make art about this. And so let's go out to the park and sketch it. So we went out to Washington Square just in time for the first tower to fall, and the adults in the park started screaming and crying, and my kids were really good in embracing them and saying, it's okay, we're here for you. And I said, okay, guys, class dismissed, go home, call your parents, tell them you're okay. My dad was actually in town at the time and he saved newspapers and he said, Keith, you should paint this. I said, Dad, I don't want to exploit this. I can never do that. And so instead I worked through allegory. This is from the 70s version of King Kong. And, having these characters, these people, this was the ghost in Hamlet played by John Lennon, obviously the cover for Imagine. And working, this is River Phoenix as Horatio again, working through allegory, James Dean as Hamlet. Maybe I could find some sort of catharsis. Keanu as Neo, also sort of a Hamlet type character. This is one of the first paintings I did when I came back to New York. This is Lincoln Remembers. And I was thinking about Andrew, who was still at the time at the cabin in Paris, wanting to save him, and a really good Republican president, Lincoln. Harry Potter as a young Hamlet. This scene always frightened me. I had nightmares about this scene, which turned out to be from the Phantom of the Opera. So I decided to paint it to get rid of the nightmares. Another sort of Claudius reference. Harry Potter as a young Hamlet to save things. The Virgin Mary based on a statue that was right outside our Soho apartment as Gertrude. This is actually Olivier as Hamlet. And I really wanted to get those feelings back that I was doing in the Iconscape harnessed onto an iconic character from a film still, try to infuse the feeling that I was getting from those abstract paintings into figurative works. and to negotiate my way between the two. This was the Beatles, obviously, with an iconscape, kind of like a literal narrative Rothko, but also thinking about, people in death camps being, brought to the gas chambers, listening to bands. This was the time of, the Iraq War and the War on Terror. And it was a really disturbing time in New York where we were all worried about anthrax on the sidewalk and all different kinds of things. This was based on Michelangelo's Pieta. Here again, the ghost. I do think of these salon style narratives that I've been composing on the wall, kind of like giant comic strips, a non-linear narrative. And I like the joke here where it's sort of act on comics, where I'm really employing the idea of the vocabulary of comics to get my point across. This was at the end of it, where I felt if George was alive now, he wouldn't stop crying about what was being done in America's name. And then the world ends, that's all, folks, like the Warner Brothers cartoon. Luckily, that show did pretty well. It was sort of my comeback show. I got a Roberta Smith review I was very honored to have. And it was nice to sort of enter back into the world. I started, again, kind of like the pet paintings, allowing myself to really just have fun painting. I'm guiltily an Elvis fan. There's a lot of political baggage with Elvis. I like to think that he did grow up on the wrong side of the tracks. And even though he did exploit blues music to get part of the power of rock and roll, along with exploiting Chuck Berry and Little Richard and all the people before him. I like the sort of befuddled masculine agency of Elvis, and also as a character that kind of helped to change the world a little bit. Our friend Alicia died at that time from AIDS, and I had a show at QED in Los Angeles. And this was called Young Rebels at the End of the World, where I really wanted to focus on these characters and ideas, though, of American rebels that really started this whole narrative that I've been doing since then called My American Dream. James Dean was a gay actor. People don't necessarily know this, but he was really sugar daddied into Hollywood. And he really brought a new kind of masculinity to that also helped to promote ideas of rock and roll. John Lennon said he wouldn't have been John Lennon without James Dean. Elvis said he wouldn't be Elvis without James Dean. And here he was, a gay man with emotive energy, who was emulating who he loved, Montgomery Clift, another gay man who was a great method actor. This was from Here to Eternity, about a soldier who didn't want to go into war. And I was listening a lot to Marvin Gaye. I always think Marvin Gaye is a great model of an artist. Like What's Going On, the album cover I base this on, has everything. It has the poetry of music infused with the politics to be able to transcend the moment, but be pertinent to the moment, but still be impactful in any age. And What's Going On sounds better than ever in our current moment. James Dean started looking a little bit like Bush. I was thinking about, Captain Kangaroo, a character I grew up with, being almost like a Michael letting this bear into heaven, the dancing bear. But, if you serve Mammon, you can't get into heaven. And he's holding a book that says gold. Ideas of industry that were propelling a lot of American ideology. This is in Lake Elsinore. I found this book of a costume character actor, and he was on the Andy Williams show as well as being the dancing bear. But I felt like this is Andy and the alien. George and John are always photographed together. It's interesting. And of course, they're the Beatles that died. And there was a lot of homosocial agency that was happening. This was me thinking about James Dean and the White House and the things that were going on with the politics of Bush, who was often categorized as being like a chimp. I love oil painting. This was called Gusher. But during the time of the Iraq War, it felt like we were sending our troops in to save oil. And this was from the movie Giant, where the character Jet Rink discovers oil for the first time. This is a James Dean crash site. I started noticing that when you're working from photos that were real, that had historic value, there was a lot to cull from those photos, a lot of amazing things that I was finding subconsciously. It looked like James Dean was in the back and a reflection of almost like a Christ-like figure in the hood of a car. And thinking like Judy Garland, what was going on. Judy was a great actress who was really strong. I was investigating why so many older gay men loved Judy, but so many younger gay men were frightened of her, but realized that she was a great, strong female protagonist that unfortunately was worked to death by Hollywood. Thinking about everything that was happening, and also Katrina was happening. And I grew up with this King Kong poster in my room. I always wanted to do a painting of it, but really thinking about nature ravaging over humankind during the time of Katrina. I kept going with these heroes. Again, Judy Garland, trying to get a little bit more tighter. Elvis, this was for a show in Brussels. This is John Lennon from Imagine. This is the Yoko, John Lennon, Bed In for Peace, double fantasy, where it was a recording that was happening that was actually changing culture at that moment. I love Andy Warhol. I feel Andy probably was on the spectrum. And he wasn't necessarily about emotion, but of course he was a genius artist. But I felt like if you could get the emotion and the feeling and the painterliness of a Rembrandt and infuse it in with the iconic pop vocabulary of a Warhol, maybe you would have something. And so I'm trying to get into the real Jackie after JFK's death. Here, of course, is JFK from an album cover that it actually was in Graceland. Laurence Olivier, also bisexual actor as Henry V and a great leader. Trying to think more positive imagery during the Bush era. Instead of doing Bush's bad kind of paintings, wanting to do more powerful paintings of characters like Jimi Hendrix that really changed music and changed culture. Tintin, this was a show in Belgium, and of course he's a Belgian hero. Bugs Bunny, another great gay celebrity in many ways, always performing in drag, always winning the day. Errol Flynn, another bisexual actor who started a film studio in Hollywood as Robin Hood, and everybody knows the ideological conceit of Robin Hood. This was a show called Kings and Queens. And I realized I started doing a lot of Americana kind of imagery, but traveling to Europe and seeing how the old masters worked, they were able to really micromanage to the macromanaged whole, which I think is another secret to the sublime. And I wanted to try to really nail down paintings like Caravaggio or Rembrandt, and maybe those unconscious happenings would happen, in the feathery touch of the painterly micromanaged moments. This was Proust. And I love Proust, and I always feel like these images are like Madelines, Proustian Madelines. I'm choosing an image to think about, and while I'm thinking about it, negotiating what I could see strategically in the composition of the form. Hopefully my unconscious spills out. This is Michelangelo's Christ from the Last Judgment of the Sistine Chapel. I felt that these were almost like seraphim angels that were hovering around Christ if there were an end of the world. Keanu and River from My Own Private Idaho. Jupiter, the king gas planet, which hopefully America wouldn't turn into a gas planet. This is from Rebel Without a Cause, when he turns around to Salminio and says, it's okay, the world didn't blow up, you could come out now. But almost like the observation tower is like a giant machine monster. Elvis, photographed in a moment that was really changing history. I love these moments that are really synthesizing a thing. And here he was playing to a big group at the first time, and the audience was going wild. This is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I've been posting My American Dream images every day. This was today's on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, just like the National Guard were on the steps yesterday. And hopefully people know about Mr. Smith, who wanted to bring truth and honesty back to Washington. This is Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, of course, and really want to pay honor to these figures, to try to get to what it is that they're about. Listening a lot to audiobooks and doing my reading and my homework to hopefully impact these images with everything that I'm feeling and thinking about these historical figures. Eleanor Roosevelt was a really powerful woman at her time, a great writer, as well as being the first lady of power, that JFK actually had to get approval in order to win from the presidency. And this is right when he did that. The Beatles and their last tour in America in the public for the last time after the shootings of JFK and Martin Luther King, and really worried that they too could get shot. But also like Judy Garland and Wizard of Oz, leading this troupe of hapless, almost gay males to a better future in a movie that really inspired a whole world and generations of people. This is James Dean actually in a tree masturbating, notoriously probably as James Dean, but again, as like sort of this great hero. This is my version of Rembrandt's Ganymede painting, but from a Thomas Edison film where a crow is rescuing a baby from an eagle's nest. And I've always wanted to be a kind of hopefully my art is our salvation, being rescued by making work. And this is Anne Frank, actually, in Anne Frank's room. And when I visited there in Amsterdam, I realized that Anne Frank was a person who wanted to be a great writer. And of course, tell everybody about the Holocaust and what happened to all the people in the Holocaust and their family, but also want to be a strong female protagonist, not necessarily a domestic like her mother. But it was performative. While she was writing, she was actually becoming that thing. And she was a great artist. She was wheat pasting images, kind of like I love to do, with high and low next to one another on a wall, just to give her hope. This is something I've been thinking about, as I've been hunkered in our bunker. Obviously, it's not this situation, but it was interesting to me that she would gaze upon these images. This is a show called Friends and Family that was in Cleveland. This is Matthew Shepard, the guy who was massacred in Wyoming and almost crucified against the fence. I did this painting of 9/11 just to get the nightmares out. For years, I would have nightmares of the people falling, and being a John Lennon fan, I would like reach out to them in my dreams and say, all you need is love. But it was harrowing. And so I finally got the newspapers that my dad gave me and decided I would paint it. And sometimes if you paint your nightmares, you can own them. And I did this listening to a lot of, Dalai Lama tapes and Buddhist chants. It was the hardest painting I've ever did. I would be crying and so on. My friends would say, you can't show this. You would never be able to sell it. And I didn't want to, but I felt like in Cleveland, maybe I could show it and tomatoes wouldn't get thrown at me. And they weren't thrown at me. And people actually found it a cathartic work. And so I dared to show it in New York, and it went okay. And it actually ended up being in the Whitney. And I was very proud for that. I feel if part of my role as a history painter is if I could try to record part of my own living history, but impact it with feeling and emotion that people could also feel synesthetically, but also critically understand what it is about. Maybe I could do something good for the world. Anne Frank, and of course I was listening to her diaries and so on. I was doing this and crying and really thinking about her journey and what she stands for. This actually ended up in the Cleveland Museum. Elvis again. Muhammad Ali, a great iconic figure who was, because he protested Vietnam, was casted out. And of course he changed his name to Muhammad, but he didn't let people put him in a box, and he decided to come back, and he was bigger and better than ever. Katharine Hepburn, who was a lesbian in real life, who wore pantsuits for the first time for women. This was the last picture of Earth taken by a human being from space, and thinking about Al Gore and global warming. Also loving Jackie and JFK and Martin Luther King. I painted this actually during Hurricane Katrina. I felt if King was alive, he would probably never stop crying. This is from a sit-in that he did too. Again, I feel like these pictures, are more pertinent than ever, sadly. But wanting to paint these great leaders that give me hope. But also, I started painting from my own images. This is an oak tree. We really yearned to come back to California. I was very honored that Ingrid Sichy interview asked me to cover the haute couture shows in Paris for some reason. And I think she wanted me to be a sketch artist of some kind, but I realized they moved too fast. I would just take my own photos and paint from them. But it was really interesting having a direct connection to the image from being there. And instead of appropriating things, I was doing my own thing. I realized at one point I was looking around my room and said, I wasn't the creator of a lot of these original images. Hopefully I'm taking them and bringing them to a different place. But by painting something from myself, I felt I had real ownership. And so it was really a start of something. This was Kim Light's gallery, Lightbox in LA. This was called Good Leaders, Endangered Species, Ships at Sea. Because at the time we really needed good leaders because they were like an endangered species in a world that is a ship at sea, kind of like now. And this was during the debates when Hillary and Barack were going at it. And this is called Drum Majors after the famous quote by Martin Luther King, where they were invoking King. Dean again, Judy Garland again, Elvis from my own photo, Shirley Temple, who was a great actress and leader and actually politician, next to whales, ships that went into perilous journeys but somehow survived. Pandas. I felt like even if you're conservative, hopefully you love pandas. This is the Karmapa, the real Karmapa, not the Chinese version of a Karmapa, who was escaped in a trunk of a car and is still around and alive. Tigers, a clipper ship that survived. The New York version of this, I did more 9/11 paintings. I didn't even know that Falling Man was a big image at the time because it was kept from us. But trying to, worried about our day. This is hopefully a nice image to see right now. I painted this before Obama was president. Actually, this show happened during the election. And so I always feel your show begins with a poster, and this was sent out. Some people actually took themselves off of Derek's waiting list. You think that a lot of art world people are super lefty liberals. Sometimes they're not. But loving Obama, like the greatest president of our time. Next to endangered species that hopefully fall into abstraction. This is the Dalai Lama at Radio City Music Hall from my own photo. Next to, the people from 9/11, and thinking about Buddhist chants about them as I was painting. Next to, this is called Bali High, where all the whales go at the top of the world for some mysterious reason. Next to Alexander the Great, who was actually a good conqueror, if that's not an oxymoron, who really loved the cultures that he was going in, but also as a gay man. Next to Louise Bourgeois. She's my model for an artist because it's psychological and it's conceptual. I would bring up my students to her, kind of like seeing Giacometti probably in the 50s in Paris on Sundays for salons. And I asked her if I could take this picture and she said yes. I was very honored. Marx Brothers from Duck Soup, where they're about to go into war, which felt very analogous to what was happening in the Bush era, next to Anne Frank. This is the Duccio painting that's at the Met, and there's a lot of micromanaged moments in this Duccio painting that are so mysterious and amazing. And wanting to get that back into my own painting. This is the El Greco opening of the Fifth Seal, where I was really learning a lot about the folds and the subconscious moments that he was inserting. I realize I only have about 8 minutes. I'm going to go pretty fast. This was a Paul Kasman show that was a retrospective of drawings I did in grad school, next to contemporary drawings at that time. I was very honored to have it. And really the source of a lot of what I do is from drawing. I was able on 8th Street when I was teaching at NYU to have a show there. And I realized at this moment that I was really making a lot of these images about Americana. And I started thinking about all my work as being part of a longer narrative called My American Dream, something I'm still continuing to do. This is from My Modern Life, a show that I did exclusively from my own images of the Karmapa, of the play Red, where people were more interested in looking at their playbills than the character of Rothko. One of my senior portraits, Andrew at the Ritz in Paris for our 40th birthdays, the Empire State Building, thinking about hopefully the power of, in a good way, of America, that hopefully we could hold on to while the city is still a city of lights. This is me with Proust in the background, again, thinking about those Proustian Madelines. Us getting married the first chance you could, with my best friend Dan Knapp marrying us. Our humble cabin home in Paris, which was really Avalon for us at the time, where I won in micromanaged moments again for things to break into abstraction. In America, I had a dream of doing a map of America and thinking Jasper Johns had a similar dream of a flag. I woke up and did it, but America without boundaries. And so I realized that Google Earth had that opportunity to create this sort of image where hopefully in unconscious moments, it breaks into abstraction. Nodler, the good people at Nodler gave me a show of my iconscapes, the iconscapes that nobody understood back in the 90s. And it was really neat to have them at Nodler, a gallery that was all about that. This was Art, Life, and Fashion in Cleveland with a lot of images from, those fashion pictures, but also watching Obama at the debates and my love for Andrew and Frank. Flower gardens, but also thinking about the fall of empire and hopefully that America wasn't like the fall of Rome, although it feels like that now. Ideas of capital, but also the exciting urgency of Times Square. Andrew at our home in California with our 2 dogs, and really the sort of blissed out beauty of the rural parts of California, that even though there are trailer homes in the foreground, nature prevails all in the background. This is Night Cabin. This was Andrew falling asleep in a sort of a My American Dream, going into the sort of blissed out way. And this was the beginning specifically of My American Dream, where I started putting these elements together for the first time of our life in New York, our dogs when they died, and still alive. This is Michelangelo still alive. The Earth as we know it. Andrew at our favorite place at the Rijksmuseum and the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam and New York. The first men who landed on the moon, wanting optimistic hope. For the My American Dream show I did at Derek Eller then, I wanted to paint Obama and his family. This is the second time he was elected, and with the whole family coming on stage was such an incredible dynamic moment that I miss now. Going back into the iconscapes, trying to get really into the unconscious space, but also being very aware of the America that we were in. This is Liberty before the hurricane happened. The view from 30 Rock, wanting all the sort of boogie woogie happening in that city. This is actually our trip to Fairmont, where James Dean was born. This is actually his house, where his cousin Marcus Winslow still lives, who was basically like a little brother, thinking of it like an all-American house for an all-American character that helped to change culture. Another big shot of New York and the fireworks that were happening outside of New York that almost felt like a sort of a weird war that might be happening. Again, another iconscape, thinking about literally like the spirits of the people that were in New York during the Hurricane Sandy. This I painted during Hurricane Sandy, this eagle that's actually outside of a Chinese restaurant in Long Beach. Andrew and I as husbands at our California home, where hopefully we don't live there now, but we still live in Riverside, and our love together is stronger than ever. And our family watching TV, growing up, from a picture that my cousin Deborah took that my dad instructed her to do, watching our first color TV. Andrew and I as kids, we were only born 4 days apart. Loving Superman as iconic character that helps the world, a Jewish assimilation story, us in our own version of heaven at our pool in Paris. At the time, I got into the Whitney Biannual, and I wanted to really help to create even more characters that you don't see in museums, strong female protagonists like Annie Oakley, who was the adopted daughter for Sitting Bull. Lincoln, actually an amazing Republican president, who really helped to change the world, thinking about him and listening to him and all the sort of the spirits that were coming out. Kermit the Frog and loving Jim Henson and the Muppets and how they changed culture, and also suturing into the avatar of Kermit. And this was the 2014 Whitney Biannual, where I was able to put My American Dream together as a segment. 9/11 was acquired by the Whitney, and Obama actually saw the image. I contacted Ed Souza after the book came out of his presidential photos, and he sent me to the Obama Library, who sent me this, and it was amazing to actually have the greatest president of our lifetime be able to look at this painting with such feeling. And I felt that the image also was kind of caustic in terms of the exit behind him. I was able to bring My American Dream in full to Marlborough Gallery at the time, with new paintings that were serving as a prologue and an introduction, where I was able to have a whole cosmology of it together, which I could show you here as you serve. This was the prologue entering into it, along with the rogue's wall. These were all of my family's history, of our ancestry. I was doing images of my family and asking them questions about where we came about and how we came about. And then this was, at that moment, for 2015, My American Dream, all put together. I then got this job at USC, and I came out and we went to the Grand Canyon, also Yosemite. I always felt like even conservatives hopefully could go to Yosemite and realize that the power of nature and how we have to have clean air and water for everyone, and trying to bring out the majesty and also the sort of American transcendentalist spirit from that world. When I was traveling cross country, my best friend Dan died. I traveled with my best friend Dan, who soon thereafter died. And I did this show in homage to him as part of My American Dream. Each of these shows now is like a chapter of this longer story. This is John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt at Yosemite, where John Muir was able to convince Teddy Roosevelt, another great Republican president, about the power of American nature and to create the national parks. But also wantonly thinking about Dan, who's pictured here on the right, and also a lost America, a lost idea of good patriarchy. This is Sun Studios, where Elvis, of course, recorded his music. This is Graceland with Santalets there now. This was Sun Studios, where this one small place where amazing music happened. Both the great music from African-American blues and early rock traditions, as well as Elvis and his friends. This was his stuff from growing up. This is Elvis and Nixon, a ludicrous moment, but I feel like Trump was almost like a fusion of these two characters in the most negative way possible. And Dan was really interested in ideas of power. This is 3 Mile Island, and we visited these places going around, but also thinking about the death of American industry and factories. This was in Bethlehem in Pennsylvania, the old factory that closed. This was a factory in Texas that was creating talc powder that causes cancer. It almost felt like a ship at sea. This was mixed in with iconscapes that were happening during Charlottesville. I feel like sometimes abstract painting is about, especially the ABX artists, that, words can't say it, and you have to do something, and you have to create something. Maybe abstraction in this case is okay. This is a border of El Paso in Mexico, Chihuahua, Mexico. And this is before the wall, but thinking about that and thinking about the life of all those people and like the incredible, like busy wonderfulness of that world, and which was very fluid, like people still go from Texas to Mexico and back again, and they love one another, they're neighbors, and they support one another. This is Trump meets the Pope, and of course this is a memed image, but it was interesting, at the Vatican, that there's this great resurrection painting happening, and it felt with the folds in the oil painting, they were almost like marionette strings that were, holding Trump aloft. And I felt like Trump, I'm not religious again, but maybe he's a thing that we have to overcome. Maybe it's a test. And if hopefully we could overcome Trump, we could overcome everything. More iconscapes. This was Dan's favorite image of this train with the windmill propellers. And so the old industry meets the new industry, and hopefully a hopeful thing for the future. Another iconscape. I'm almost done here. I might go just slightly longer. This was a show at 57th Street, Marlborough. I got to be the first young downtown person, or youngish downtown person uptown. And I did this conceptually to be at 57th Street. This was called My American Dream, Heroes and Villain. You can see who the villain is. And really thinking about how Trump Tower was around the corner from this show, and that people might go from one to the other. I had to do the sort of, infinity mirror painting of Obama looking at my 9/11 painting, hopefully bringing it into a larger allegorical context, thinking about now and Trump being a disaster. But also the dawn rising over a new New York. Hopefully that will happen. Andrew and our goose Goldie. I always think in an epic, you always have private moments of a family next to major moments like this. Harriet Tubman, obviously, as Moses. And she really was a Moses character who still is very pertinent, obviously. Christopher Street, the Stonewall Gang, who really helped to revolutionize gay rights. Again, another history painting where I felt my job was to bring life and color to this famous historic photo. Liberty, again, but Liberty sort of falling apart. Hopefully a not ironic picture of the Muppets. I grew up with this calendar. I felt my job was to make it a good painting. Loving Grant Wood, another gay artist who also did illustration and fine art, meets the Muppets, who really did bring about change, as did the American. This is a appropriation of Titian, of St. Christopher. And there's Yosemite in the background in Washington, D.C. Hopefully we need people and spirits like this to carry us through the Trump era. Batman, hopefully at the beginning was not just a vigilante character, but kind of a homoerotic guy, and the strong female protagonist, obviously, of Wonder Woman, next to Jane Fonda, who's still very much active and alive, who's pointing her guns at this guy. But I wanted to give Stormy agency and make it, it really is MySpace, Stormy Daniels, but the weirdness of this moment where it says Wicked in the background and the apocalypse in the back. I did this plein air at the Grand Canyon, and the flag was half mast, actually, from the Santa Fe shootings. And this kid escaped those shootings. His name was Rome, and he had a bullet graze his neck, but he survived. And I took this picture off MSNBC, listening to his interview. Emma Gonzalez, obviously, but the sort of Joan of Arc moment where she was having her moment of silence in the March on Washington for March of Our Lives, thinking about all the people that died during the shootings. Robert Mueller, who was supposed to save us but didn't. Malcolm X, who did save a lot of people and reformed and was such a great dynamic figure who makes so much sense right now. LeBron James, obviously a great hero of our time, who cured the Cleveland curse, but more than that, acts as a dynamic political figure and a hero, almost perfect gentleman for our time. This was George Acosta at a Trump rally with all the Trumpians yelling at him, but him still holding strong for the freedom of the press. Andrew, in a moment that almost felt like Kirchner and German Expressionism in New York, and Yosemite, almost like a heaven at the end of it. Last summer, and this is the last part of this, I promise I'll get through it. I was at the Elaine de Kooning residency in the Hamptons. I love Elaine de Kooning. This was of her grave, a plein air painting. Strong female protagonist who really led the ABX movement, wrote about the ABX movement. Everybody needs to read 9th Street Women. This was her painting in the studio that I got to be in. I listened to all of her opera, but also want to do my own thing, going back into their ideology of iconscapes. But next to images of her here with the Colossus JFK, she had the opportunity to paint him in real life. And of course, in the National Gallery, one of the best paintings in the National Gallery is still by Elaine, next to an iconscape. Elaine and Bill. Elaine was painting her pictures of men outside on the porch of Leo Castelli's in the Hamptons, these gyroscope men with their legs splayed open, very abstract, that gave my theory, Bill, the idea to do his women's series, and he was doing these simultaneously in the interior, trying to reinvent the Hans Nemeth famous photo, trying to get in there for the iconic imagery that was happening, trying to bring out those images even further of my iconscapes, to try to get to that space that's transcendent but real. I got to do plein air painting at the Paula Krasner house, thinking about them, listening to their Broadway, their sort of boogie woogie jazz, being influenced by that with the iconscapes. Young Jackson Pollock lived just blocks away from where I am right now, in Riverside, who, even though he became a jerk, was a starry-eyed dreamer who really did help to change art. And then finally, the Irascibles. Like, Andrew's like, why do you want to paint these guys? Well, I listened to all the 9th Street Women, the Mary Gabriel book on audiobook when I was doing this painting, really thinking about the women. I thought hopefully there's something politically subversive about doing a figurative painting of guys who are doing abstraction, and of course head to stern in the back. FYI, this was a big canvas and I was using a linen that degrades brushes, and so I used leftover, well, a box of new tampons that a previous resident had to paint the background. So I painted this in part with tampons. And so hopefully there's a homo feminist urgency to this picture, making these heroes just men, but also, you know, people as a group who in their own right actually love women, had women as part of their group, Joan Mitchell and Grace Hardigan, Lee Krasner, who really also are so important, just as important as the guys, and important to remember. But also a group of people that really believed in what it was that they were doing and trying to be triumphant for America. And despite the CIA empowerment movement for themselves ideologically wanting to do something and say something that was about pure art that matters, art that was really about something in a time where it was necessary to do art and find edification from looking at art and creating it. And with that, I'm going to stop my share and thank you guys for your patience. I'm 10 minutes over, but hopefully there's still a few people there. Hi, Bailey.
Hi. Thank you so much, Keith, for that amazing lecture. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
My great honor, seriously. Thank you so much. It's all about this, so thank you.
There's a few questions that some people have asked on the YouTube channel.
Great.
I'll just read them. Walter asks, have you ever shown or considered showing the photos you've taken to paint from?
I have thought about it. I'm a wannabe photographer. I'd like to do that one day. I like to think that they hold their own, but for now, I still think of them as reference material. And the neat thing with photos in high definition age is we could do something that Turner couldn't do, where you could take an image and have in high res detail all those little moments that you could cull from while you're painting. So for now, I'm happy to take the photos, print them out on my nice Epson printer, and like look at them with my 000 and micromanage away.
Let's see. Oliver asks, what are some iconic moments or people that you haven't painted yet but would like to? Anything or anyone you feel like you've missed the opportunity to paint?
Boy, there's a lot. Right now, I would love to paint James Baldwin. I would like to paint Frederick Douglass. I would like to paint more people of color and heroes that are not the straight white patriarchy that have really influenced me, that still continue to influence the world. And, we're living in this moment right now and thinking about, reflecting about how to paint further through this time to get hopefully to a different time, but also to record this. I think for all of us right now, this is Weimar America, and the art that we're making, young and old, is super important and couldn't matter more. And so, trying to encapsulate that in what I'm doing currently.
For sure. That kind of leads to this next question. You referred to yourself as a historical painter. Can you expand upon that term and the role of contemporary painting in constructing history?
That's a good question. Thanks. I think of myself as like sort of a conceptual installation artist who happens to paint and draw in some ways, but then, some part of me, I do feel like a history painter. Adam Weinberg and the Whitneys said I was, and so maybe that makes it so. I do think it's interesting. When you think of history painting, you usually think of like, oh, it's like old and tired, or David at the Louvre. But if making art is about recording a moment, that I feel like our role is to ourselves primarily, and also to a pure audience that we want to reach. But I also feel like there is something about recording this time. And I think if in a postmodern way, hopefully you could have your cake and eat it too, where you can make work that's about something, but it doesn't have to be nailed down in a specific style or anything like that. Like how it's not like a photo is what's you about it. Picasso would say how you draw a circle without the aid of a compass. Its imperfection is what's you about it. So if we can look at history that's happening at this moment and be able to record it in our own personal way, then hopefully you could get that feeling where, like at the Whitney, Andrew and I would go there, honestly, and I was, you know, it was very bittersweet to be in the inaugural show downtown because of that, what painting it was that they chose to put up. But I would see a lot of people gathered around. Some people were crying, people would tell their stories. The best thing was when adults would tell their kids what had happened by pointing at the picture, telling the story. And I think if you can make an image that says 1,000 words that makes people feel something, then you have them to be able to think about something. So if you can feel and think at the same time, that's something that pictures can do and art can do that gives it validation. And for me, like I do feel like this role of being able to, and wanting to be able to for the moment, just to get through it, record what's happening now. But hopefully if there's any value to it for other people to be able to appreciate it and understand what it was that we went through, and also be able to feel it psychologically and be able to impact their own ideas towards what that image might mean, to make it pertinent, hopefully for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. How do you make curatorial choices when installing your work in a space?
Oh, geez. So, you know, I do come from theater and I do come from comics. I teach comics too. I'm proud that I started a narrative art minor at USC, which hopefully will develop into a own program because, you know, art's for everybody and comics are really that. I had a student, Nate Powell, win the National Book Award for his work with Senator John Lewis on a graphic novel series called March and so on. So I do think about how, for me, paintings or drawings are really like panels in a comic, and how you space images to in installations is about something, even if you aren't cognizantly thinking about it. And so when I'm thinking about a show, instead of counting sheep at night, I'm thinking about this painting will go here, no, will go here, no, I switch it around. On Photoshop, I figure out exactly how it's going to be in the space, thinking about, like theater, the journey of the experience the audience will have going gallery. What's the trajectory of the gallery? What will they see first, second, third, and why? Or even if they go backwards, you know, if it's elliptical or like a panopticon, how that will work. And so the spacing for me is really important. Like if it's a lot of space between images, there's a pregnant pause that happens. If they're really close together, it makes time move faster. If I have one image next to another image, what does that mean in the clash of closure that the audience will project onto the images? And so dealers, you know, sometimes don't like that. They want the big paintings in the big room, the small paintings in the small room. But I say to the guys, like, look, you guys, I'm an installation artist. It happens to work with painting. I will have this figured out. Just trust me. And the installations go up really fast because I know where everything goes. It's really neat to see a show manifest like that. And even if people don't get the narrative aspects of it, the narrative conceit, the nonlinear narrative, because I don't necessarily like the Pinocchio have a MacGuffin, that character that people could follow through the story. The good news for me is when I hear people say like, oh, it was really weird when I saw your show. It was like I was experiencing something, or all these emotions were happening. It was strange. I'm like, perfect. Like that's what I want, to take people on a visual ride where they're experiencing something where they, you know, the best shows are when you forget what gallery or museum you're in and you're just really experiencing the work and thinking about your thoughts and your emotions, and you take away that in your gut. And that's what I'm striving for.
Chris asks, you mentioned that you departed from art for a number of years in the 90s and then came back to it. Can you talk a little bit about what brought you back and what it meant for you to come back?
I didn't depart from art, but I departed from the art world. So I was like 30 years old and I was like, oh my gosh, again, like the mendacity of the art world, rich white people, were they the audience I want to talk to growing up, wanting to be a cartoonist? No. And it's stupid. Like most people in the art world are actually, I think, good people now. I'm an optimist. The glass is half full with me. And, you know, the collectors are almost like or people giving you grants to pursue your research. And hopefully if they are really good collectors, they're really wanting to pull the discourse in the way that they believe in, because they believe in what it is that you're doing and thinking. And same goes with curators, same go with gallerists. Gallerist is really about pushing along the discourse of ideas. And, art's a great venue to be able to display ideas if it's about thinking aesthetically to a larger public. And I love the art world now. And I love the core of the art world, which has always been about this. It's always been about invention and discourse and ideas and so on. So I was painting in the provinces of Paris, near you guys, where I live now in Riverside. It was very humbling because I pulled my stuff out of the galleries and I was just like, wait a minute, like here I am in our cabin next to Costco and these ZZ Top guys, and like, what am I doing? Like, why am I here? Like, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? I think that life is about helping people. Obviously, teaching does that. I love teaching. I think it's really important as artists that we teach too and pass on the baton to other people. But like, if I'm wired to do this, I should just do it and get over it. And it took, honestly, 6 or 7 years. I was painting in my apartment in Soho. And like, once you take yourself off the map in the art world, people don't really like that. We should be grateful for what we're given and accept it and be gracious. And I was a stupid, young guy, but I learned my lesson. And in a good way, one could say, like, I took myself off the path and I was climbing up the rocky side of the edifice. I'm still climbing that rocky side. And it was interesting in terms of that journey. But I also think we need to take challenges to be good artists. And if something starts feeling like production of, I was doing these circle paintings, I started to be known as the circle guy after being known as the Pinocchio guy. But then I started doing these paintings. I'm like, wait a minute, here's another one. And I already learned what this was about. I want to challenge myself and change it. And I think if we could keep that going, no matter what success we have or not, nobody's paying you enough in this world to compromise your intentions, to compromise your muse for whatever trends might be happening. Or obviously art's not about commodity, and commodity is not the reason to make art, but we should appreciate the venues that we have that are really about art, especially now. Like, I think, hopefully we won't become a fascist authoritarian dictatorship, right? And art is a place that is about critical thinking, aesthetic thinking, that is about feeling and thinking for yourselves. And it's so important for the world. I mean, maybe all the world doesn't understand it, and it's way too rarefied still, although YouTube and the internet helps. But if you could bring your ideas in pictures or whatever it is that your art manifests itself to a public, and it's edifying for you to make it, not that art's therapy, but everybody's getting something out, and it's hopefully edifying for a culture. So I'm over it now. I love the art world. I love teaching. I love and feel honored to be an artist and to have this well to draw upon. And honestly, it keeps me going. If I don't paint, after a few days, I start getting headaches. I start feeling jittery, and then all of a sudden I'm painting again. It's like, why did I stop? It just feels so good to paint. And I feel it's wonderful as artists, we have this ability to express ourselves, especially in this time. It's important to march safely in the street with our masks on, keeping 10-foot distance with somebody, but it's also important to heal ourselves. Like the Dalai Lama, again, I'm not a Buddhist, but I think holding my hand over the flame of Buddhism helps. And he says, it's like it's like the air mask thing in the airplanes. Like, you have to make yourself happy first or healthy first in order to help other people. And if life's about helping other people, hopefully we help ourselves first. And if art making is a way to do that, it's essential to what it is that we're doing. I told my kids at USC, like, look, what you guys are doing, even at your age, is so important right now, because people are going to look back at this time and think about what people are doing and what people are making and what people were about. And what you're saying is so important, especially for you guys. Like, you guys are holding the lantern of truth for other generations. And it's about you guys to take over for the future. And hopefully Obama's right that what we're experiencing now, this great groundswell movement that is an anti-hate movement that is going to supersede all and get us over this moment to a way better future. So it does make me excited and making art. keeps me happy and keeps me sane. And hopefully it helps people in some way or the other.
That leads us really nicely into maybe the last question. David asks, what is your best creative strategies that you used then and now to deal with not getting jaded on all the genocidal realities of the American dream and the myriad pandemics that are still ongoing?
Yeah, so in the Bush era, again, like I didn't want to do Bush's bad paintings, rather sort of optimistic paintings that made me feel good. Like I did my Danse Macabre stuff when I was younger with dancing skeletons and all. So I was trying to focus on positive imagery, like, you know, John Lennon and Yoko, right? And if that's my meditation, if that's my Proustian Madeline, if I'm listening to music and other things that makes me feel good, it helps me insert myself into that space. It actually works. It actually, you know, it's not just the new age power of positive thinking, by making positive imagery that gets me over the hump. However, right now, because it is such a scary time, I have to draw the, you know, you look at the news, it's like a Black Goya painting. And I have to deal with it. It's like painting your nightmares. And if you could paint your nightmares, you own them and they don't haunt you anymore. And when 9/11 happened, Times Square closed down, but then it started slowly opening it up. And I said to my dad, Andrew, and I said, like, I want to take advantage of a horrible situation, but maybe we should go see The Producers, because it was the hot Nathan Lane, Matthew Broderick play at the moment. And the producers of The Producers came out, not Mel Brooks, but everybody else. They said, look, you know, this is a musical about Hitler. And if you can laugh at something, it makes it smaller. It objectifies it. It contains it. And I feel like, well, if I could paint Trump, not that I want to invite him into my house, but if I could paint what's going on now, hopefully it helps to objectify it. It helps to own it, helps to express yourself about that. And it helps to have it not be so overwhelming, and to make it your own. And then hopefully other people could have the catharsis of that expression too, where they can relate to what it is that you're doing and help to understand for themselves what this is all about, or find a point of reference where you find a fellow traveler, and have that moment. And so I think it is really important to make art during this time. I mean, obviously, sometimes you just have to exhale, or like bunker down in your bunker. Or if you're at a depression, like you just don't feel like getting out of bed. But you know, if you do make art, if you can get out of bed, if you can, you know, have that moment for me, rendering, but make any kind of work, it's such a great creative outlet. It does make you feel good. It's healing for your soul. I do think that's what it comes down to. It's, you know, again, in a non-religious way, you know, it's about our soul, right? The soul of America, the soul of what we're feeling. I think when you're making a work that has a life of its own, it's like the birds and the bees. You're making something from your soul, whatever that is to you, that hopefully expresses itself, that other people's souls could relate to. And, you know, we're all in this together. It is the sublime thing where you feel, when you recognize and can objectify yourself of being a small part of a much bigger thing, that's really illuminating and wonderful, because you realize that you need to relate to other people. It's all interconnected, that we're connected to every single other person on this planet, all the other people in this country. We're all living on this earth that we need to take care of if we're barnacles on this boat, and we need to take care of our planet, take care of the people, and promote ideas of agency and democracy for us and for everyone. And we could do that in art. I really believe that.
Yeah, I hope so.
I hope so too.
Well, thank you so much, Keith, for taking the time to talk to us today. It was a great lecture. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Paolo, for helping us with the tech side, as always. And thank you, Amy, in the Visual Arts Department, for hosting the lecture series this year. Thanks so much, everybody.
It's my great honor, and I'm so humbled to be here tonight. Thank you guys for your time, for watching this, if you've watched it, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Bailey. Thank you, everybody, Paulo, who's behind this. And I look forward to seeing you in the near future when the droplets settle in real time and space. Yeah, keep making art and appreciating art, you guys. It's really important. Love what it is that you're doing. Love yourselves enough so you can help love other people in this world.
So thank you. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, USC's, they always say, fight on, everybody.